All right, everyone, thank you and welcome to Sustainable Development Conference 2021. I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Lynn Howard, and this is the panel of Urban Development and Sustainable Architecture. We have 4 fabulous panelists. I'm actually going to turn on my video so everybody can see me. And I'm going to let them do a quick introduction of themselves. And I'm going to start with Anna. Anna, if you don't mind giving a quick introduction of yourself before we jump in.
Of course, thank you, Lynn. Well, my name is Cristina. I live in Mexico, in the north of Mexico, in the city of Monterrey. I'm an architect, and nowadays I am a full-time professor at the University of Monterrey in the Department of Architecture. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Anna. We're excited to have you and can't wait to hear your perspectives and ideas and all that great stuff. And how about you, Erum?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Erum Afsar. I'm here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, also known as Amiskwaciwâskaken on Treaty 6 territory. And I am an engineer by profession. I work for the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of Alberta as Director of Enforcement. I am also Municipal Councillor for Kananaskis Improvement District, a beautiful park space, Alberta's playground near Calgary, Alberta.
Excellent, thank you. How about you, Monno?
Hi everybody, I'm Valeria Monno from Italy. I am an associate professor at the Technical University of Bari, and I teach urban and regional planning. I've been always concerned with the sustainable development at the urban and regional level. And I'm strongly concerned with the integration among the 3 dimensions of sustainability.
Thank you so much. And Satprem?
Yes, I'm Satprem Maïni. I'm a French national living in India for the last 32 years. I'm the director of the Auroville Insitute, where I work as an architect and a researcher. We have been working for all this time on the developing earth architecture and especially stabilized earth blocks. Okay, thank you.
Excellent, Satprem, thank you. And we have all different countries today, which is really exciting. I love it when we have such a mix of countries. The first question, and this question is going to be directed to all of you before we dig into some deeper questions, is why did you say yes to be on this panel today? So, Erum, I'm going to start with you because I saw you smile.
I think I'm also, as much as I'm interested in a conversation with my panelists and sharing my experiences, I'm always interested in learning from others. Obviously, we've lived through a pandemic for the last 2 years, and I'm wanting to hear where we are as thought leaders and leaders in this area of urban development. And for myself, very timely with the work that I do as a municipal councillor, park space that was nature that was greatly utilized by Albertans here in Canada during the pandemic to give them a reprieve from the pandemic. And it's put some interesting challenges and pressures on us as decision makers. And so I just wanted to obviously share my experiences, but obviously also hear from others and learn from what others across the globe have experienced during this really unique period in time.
Absolutely. We're always excited to learn. And that's what Tomorrow People organization is all about, the diversity of thought and just different ideas and learning from one another and collaboration. So excited to have you. How about you, Satprem? What made you say yes to be on this panel?
In fact, when I took the decision to work with us, it was in fact before this kind of so-called sustainability movement started, because this was in the years 1980s. And working with us is for me one of the most sustainable material to be used on the planet now, because you have plenty of earth everywhere in the world, and you can have something totally sustainable while building with earth if you manage properly the resources. It means we have plenty of resources in different kinds of, like from wood to stones and so on. But for every kind of material and technique, people don't manage properly the resources. That's why the first approach to build with us, and then in fact for every other technique, is to manage properly the resources, both naturally but also human. Because I would say that the world was sustainable until the end of the 19th century, before this so-called industrial revolution. And with this, all this modern development that we have, we don't manage anymore the resources, neither human nor natural. That's why I felt that this conference was important for me to maybe try to bring something and to hear from others what they think of it. Thank you.
Excellent, Satprem. Thank you. How about you, Valeria?
I was challenged by the fact that this panel was titled Urban Development and Sustainable Architecture. So I felt that there was a gap between the two, between urban development and sustainable architecture. And I thought that this kind of discussion in which urban planning, urban design is erased in some way is very dangerous, because from my point of view, we need to combine the sustainable architecture with urban development. Otherwise, we risk of remaining entrapped in architecture without building sustainable urban environment. That was my first reflection, being here in order to fill a gap, thinking about how to, together, collectively, how to merge the urban development with sustainable architecture. And the other aspect that challenged me was that I'm used to speaking, to interact with my colleagues, but nowadays discourses on sustainable development goes through network and social network, and I feel that it could be useful being present in this discussion, because there could be another gap between ideas, concept, and practices. So I think that that was why I decided to be here, trying to fill some gaps.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to talk about those gaps. So I'm going to come back to you about those questions. Thank you so much, Valeria. How about you, Anna?
Well, first, three main reasons, like the principles. The first one is that I fully trust tomorrow people's work. So for me, it was an honor to be also invited. The second one is that I truly think that urban development, it is a main or priority issue, because worldwide, I think things are not getting easy with the earth, with the people, with the pandemic, with a lot of issues, right? And the third one, it is not that it's the least important, but I think that I have been studying the urban sprawl for the last 3 years. So from the perspective that I've been studying it, it is a humanistic and sustainable perspective, which is why I felt pretty identified with this panel. And of course, I was eager to participate on it.
Excellent. Thank you, Anna. All right. So let's talk about the gap between urban development and sustainable architecture. And actually, Valeria, you brought this up. What would you say to people who maybe aren't aware of the gap, or even what the two are and how they play together? How would you describe the gap between the two and what they are?
I think that we should speak about urban sustainability, for example, because urban development is something that has impressively occurred since last century. So, and I'm afraid that urban development will be the most important trends in the future, because at least in my country, we can see a continuous movement of people from the inland to urban areas. So with the really scaring abandonment. So from my point of view, speaking about urban sustainability implies to reasoning to the local and global level and trying to connect not only sustainable architecture to not connect, but insert sustainable architecture in urban development. But from my point of view, if we consider carefully the meaning of urban sustainability, then we inevitably find ourselves involved in discourses concerning the social and natural linkages that shapes the cities, for example. And if we think of this link, we cannot avoid thinking to a larger environment. So from my point of view, urban planning, if concerned with urban sustainability, can be a crucial perspective to avoid imagining sustainability as something that can be reached by adding the green mobility, the green buildings. We cannot obtain sustainability from my point of view, thinking separately different aspects of the city and having in mind that we are speaking of sustainability at the urban level can help us not forgetting and not the nature that lives in our cities. Otherwise, I think that we will be deemed to live in increasingly anthropocentric urban environments.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to come to you with that question as well. What would you say the gaps are between the urban development and the sustainable architecture, and maybe even some, like Valeria had gave her ideas of what the two are as well?
Good question. So I might take a different approach to this just from where my viewpoint is. And in my mind, one aspect of sort of looking at this issue is financial sustainability, which also equals environmental sustainability. And I look at it from a governance perspective and where I sit on a municipal council. So obviously many projects, including, capital projects of infrastructure, roads, buildings, etc. There's an initial upfront cost, which municipalities have to somehow find the dollars. So where I live, generally that's from tax base or from government grants, which are getting smaller and smaller. And obviously with the pandemic, your tax base and ratepayers were impacted as well in terms of their livelihood. So there was a significant impact. And then at the same time, you have all these infrastructure buildings, et cetera, that you need to maintain and operate over a long period of time. And so we see now inflation going up. So energy costs, running these buildings, all these operating costs are increasing. And for those who are in governance, it's always stressful to figure out how do we meet this shortfall. So looking at sustainable architecture for me is like, how do we create viable infrastructure that will last over the long term, that obviously has manageable upfront costs of a capital cost, but over the lifespan of the project is also sustainable in terms of those pieces regarding energy efficiency, even just return on investment. And so I think there's some other topics we might hit on today in terms of, green infrastructure included in these buildings, whether it's energy generation, solar panels, or whether it's rooftop farming or vertical farming, or how do we maximize the investment we get so that in the end, we are also financially sustainable. And I know, speaking from municipal's perspective, those conversations get tougher and tougher. And it's a new space to be in, because oftentimes the end result is, okay, well, we're just going to make cuts to services, which has a further impact on society, because generally those cuts come to social services, right? How we create a community that thrives, and how we create spaces and opportunities for those who maybe are not within the traditional net of society. And so a lot of the conversations I'm having right now are about how do we use our dollars, limited dollars, the collective wealth together to help create opportunities and community and spaces that are healthy and sustainable for everyone.
Thank you so much, Erum. And Anna, I'm going to come over to you and ask you the same question.
Thank you, Lynn. Yes, I think it's a pretty good question, as Erum said, and I will answer from the gap between those terms, the both of them. And I think that from their origin, none of them are bad. I mean, urban development is not bad, sustainable is not bad. And however, territorial planning and urban development kind of forgot, you know, to consider urban expansion must be sustainable. That is, that means that urban development should not only have economic objectives, which is something that we can find out in a lot of countries, which we are, you know, expanding. So if we remember the triple bottom line of sustainability, there are three main pillars, which are the environment, the social, and the economic. So there must be a balance between those three elements. And sometimes in the urban development, we forgot that. We go just with the economics, or sometimes we just go with the environmental. And I think must be like the cases or examples which Erum mentioned. Those are looking forward to take care of the three of them, the three bottom line.
Yes, thank you, Anna. And actually, since we had the ladies answer, I'm going to come to you, Satprem, and ask you the same question, because I feel like you might have a slightly different take as well. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, because I'm an architect, and in fact, my involvement into urban development and urban planning is really limited. So I would say, like it was mentioned, yes, we should actively integrate the three parameters of sustainable development, which is economic, social also, and of course, environmental. And for me, a way to have a proper urban development should integrate people first. That means they have to, in fact, they should be able to have a self-governance, to be involved in the management of their own development and to propose what they want to do. And of course, helped and gathered by professionals who know how to do things properly. And apart from that, I don't really know how to contribute to that. And I would say, yes, in fact, to have something more sustainable in terms of urban planning, it has to integrate, of course, the resources, economics, but also how the urban space is created. We can have different scale of spaces where different hierarchy of activities from the most intimate ones to more public ones. And to have, that's why it is important to have participation from people. So I don't see anything else to say.
Thank you, Satprem. I appreciate all of those answers. The variety is great, and the similarities as well. We have actually a question from our chat box, our Whova team, and I'm going to bring this over to Erum first, and then I'm going to go to Anna, because both of you with the cities, and actually one of them's in Canada. So, and Erum, you had mentioned during pandemic, the effects that the pandemic has had on us, etc. And the question was, during the pandemic, we have noticed many people leaving downtown cores of cities, not just in Canada, actually all over the world, and to the suburbs and traditional farming land. And this individual is curious of how this plays into the sustainability of urban spaces that have once seen urban sprawls and now are empty.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's interesting dynamic that's occurred. So here where I live in Edmonton, for the past number of years, there's been a huge focus on building up our urban core, from transportation infrastructure to bringing in investment to major infrastructures like, you know, an arena, etc. And then the pandemic hit and there was a mass exodus. So you had all these office buildings that are essentially empty during the pandemic. And then you actually have those who are left behind. And so there's a huge impact in terms of deaths related to opioid crisis, etc. And I think that's also played into why urban spaces have become maybe downtown, especially that we refer to the center or the core, become less desirable. And that kind of exodus to the I guess the sprawl or the suburbs as we know, I think there's a number of factors. One, people are spending more time or had to spend more time in their home, in their spaces, and they just generally wanted more square footage. I think it's just basic, you know, they didn't want to live in cramped spaces in an urban core. What they would enjoy before in terms of an urban setting, maybe proximity to restaurants and to theater and to nightlife, all ended or closed down during the pandemic, right? So what was there to do? And I think people then were like, okay, well, if I'm going to be stuck in my home, I want to live somewhere where I have more square footage. And now I need to work from home and I need an office and I'm stuck in my house with my 3 kids. And we all need, you know, we had a homeschool. So I think it's just a fundamental, like human, like I need more space. And so traditionally those spaces in where I live are less expensive as you move outside of the core. And we also saw many people who were like, you know, I actually want more space and, you know, go to acreages or using up the land in that way. And so after this pandemic and whether there's a return to sort of the life we had before and return to office in a, you know, central core will be interesting if people return. I know that in Edmonton, there are a lot of empty office spaces downtown. And the question is, what is going to be done with those commercial spaces? How can they be used differently? Again, I go back to the tax incentive. So obviously looking at municipalities and the bigger footprint you have, the harder it is to get services to all those spaces. And fundamentally there becomes financial viability. And therefore that's why there's, desire to have investment in centralized places. But now it's how do you bring back that that investment and how do you focus it again? How do you get people to recommit to the core, especially, you know, corporations, you know, all their employees are happy working at home. How do they make that transition? So I think it's going to be a really interesting time. It's going to take partnerships, coordination, and lots of dialogue and discussion about what do people want now? What are they looking for? And talking about sustainability.
Absolutely. Thank you, Erum. That's actually, I've been in this topic so much over the pandemic, even though this is not my field, but I have some clients who are realtors here in Thailand. And exactly the same thing happened here. People wanted more space. They wanted a little bit of greenery. So they were trying to find homes in Bangkok or moving outside of Bangkok. And I hear this about all these other cities as well. Anna, I know you have something to add to this question as well. So I want to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Yes, of course, these questions and these topics are just excited for me. But let's understand something. The cities, as the persons we grow with the time, biological development, and the cities, they are not that different if we want to understand how does a city grows or expands. So in here, adding to the question and to the answer, I will say that city centers were being more desirable, of course, before pandemia, okay? They were being more desirable, more developed and everything, because several reasons, but one of them, it was because you can offer citizens a style of life, urban life, which were held by connectivity and access to greater amount of urban resources if you were going to live in the center of any city worldwide. So however, with the pandemic, this was a double-edged sword, you know, because the urban lifestyle still sold like this. It was in confinement. So this means that therefore the lifestyles with the wide open spaces, was more value during the pandemic. So maybe I was living in the center of my city in Mexico City, but I was just inside my small place. And what I was needing was open spaces to go and get some sun if the country allows it, to go and need connection with the environment. So this is where architects, planners, urban sociologists, we have to re-question how are we building cities and what does city means nowadays with the pandemic. That is something that I will just add to the answer that my colleagues here just gave before.
I love that. Thank you, Anna. Satprem, I'm going to come to you as an architect. What do you think that we could learn globally, especially in sustainable architecture, from the pandemic moving forward? Please unmute yourself.
Yes, in fact, as it was mentioned earlier, once people were locked down in France, because I live in India, but my friends are in France, and they were told that they could hear again the birds, because as they were compelled to be at home or to be in green spaces around their home, they discovered that they could hear again nature. And this is really important for me, because in the cities where people live too much, they work and they live, they're totally disconnected from nature. And the fact that they could hear again the birds in nature was really a big sign, and maybe it can be a reversal of the trend that people go from the countryside to the cities. Maybe there can be a movement inverse now, but to have a kind of in-between space between urban development and rural development. It means to have maybe a wider areas of urban development, but totally spread and be more in contact with nature. So this is what we could, in fact, imagine and hope for the future.
Thank you. And Valeria, I'm going to ask you the same thing. What do you feel that that the urban development or the sustainability individuals or bucket can learn from this pandemic and apply?
I'm very lucky because I live in a fantastic region in Italy, which is still a rural region. And at the same time, I can testify a dramatic change of my home city from being a city to become a metropolitan area. So this is from my point of view, it's something devastating myself. What I can say about your question, I can say that what we learned was that people like living in rural areas. If the economy allows people to live in rural area, they still stay there. What we learned is that we need to balance metropolitanization with the rural development. We should start again thinking not only to urban life as the only way we have to survive, but that living in the countryside, practicing farming, it's fundamental for us. This is a crucial question from my point of view in respect of climate change. If we continue to try to go back to a model of urban development that has devastated the environment, we cannot do nothing. We can use a lot of financial resources without solving the problem of people, especially poor people, because I believe that pandemic also taught us that the most vulnerable, economically vulnerable people are also the most vulnerable to pandemic. So this depends on an economic model which is centered on displace people from rural areas to urban areas. I visited the Mexico City. I was shocked by Mexico City. I couldn't stop seeing around me houses, and I was shocked by seeing the houses following the forms of the land. It was like drawing.
Thank you, Valeria. I'm going to ask Erum now if you could see your hand raised. You want to follow up on that question?
Yeah, it's just the comment that resonated with me was about nature and how we need nature. I think that's one thing that we, as human beings, discovered, that we need nature. And maybe in terms of the dialogue and how we survived as a species, it may have been a little bit of a context of, you know, humans versus nature, but now we realize that nature is part of us. We need it almost for our well-being and our soul and our mental health. And just going back to the area that I represent as a counselor, is about 40 minutes drive from a major metropolitan area in Alberta called Calgary, Alberta. And we had an increase of visitation in 2020 to 5 million plus visitors. Typically it's visited internationally, but that got shut down with the pandemic. And then it was rediscovered, I think, by those living locally because they needed something to do. And by that, when we talk about who we saw everyone. We saw those who typically had been avid users of those areas. So imagine, so hopefully people will Google it and I'll put it in the chat where it is, but essentially it's a mountain area with beautiful trails and very much kept as natural as possible. And people used it heavily. And those who were newcomers or first time users of natural spaces like that, and those who had used it broadly. And what I think I discovered, and I think most of us discovered, is a affiliation and reconnection with nature. And even where I live in Edmonton, we have many natural areas. We have a beautiful river valley system. And so those were also well used. So by being well used, I mean, to hike some trails, you have to wake up at like 5 o'clock in the morning to get there. In terms of getting a parking spot so that you could actually hike up the trail, it became as in demand as, going to a concert or a nightclub, which was fantastic, had other challenges. But I think when it comes back to the concept of urban development, sustainable architecture, I think that's the question we need to relook at, is how do we keep those pristine natural areas as untouched as possible? I know we create park spaces and those are all really important to gather people, but there's something about being, even in the river valley system here in Edmonton and walking on a trail surrounded by trees and not even feeling like you're in the city, but you're literally like 2 minutes from, a major roadway, but you can't hear it, you can't see it. It's something in terms of that piece of being part of nature that is really, really important.
Absolutely. Thank you, Erum. Anna, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Lynn. Yes, I think it is not only about the relationship with the environment, which means with nature. It is something that we need to go further. For example, in Mexico City, you are not able to see nature like in all the different places of the city, like just Valeria was saying. In Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, you need to be close to the beach because the Brazilians, they have saudade da praia, which means if they don't go to beach, I don't know, in maybe 2 days, they really feel that they are lacking something and it's inner, So this means that the urban style of life, it is different because we have different values depending where we were born, and that's normal and that's okay. But what I've learned in Canada when I was there, it was a concept that then I went to further and to research, that it was urban happiness. Countries need to start measuring urban happiness, which means that we need to kind of settle and to study about which is the level of satisfaction of a citizen with its lifestyle offered by the city where he or she lives. This means my urban happiness, the level of urban happiness of the Cariocas of Rio de Janeiro, it is way different than the level of the people living in Sao Paulo, even though it is the same country. The same happens in Mexico, the same happens in Tokyo, everywhere. But we need that the government, the political issues and urban affairs straight go into studying urban life, urban happiness, sorry, which is something that I think it is sometimes in some places a new concept, in other ones it is not new, but we need to settle the bottom line with the urban happiness, and from there going for a sustainable and good life, quality of life for citizens.
Thank you, Anna. I want to bring the question over to Satprem and ask you, with you having the architecture background and really utilizing the resources, what would be your advice to those that are moving out of the core city areas into more rural or urban areas to really build in a more sustainable way and design in a more sustainable way, so that way we're protecting our land or our nature, or keeping that urban happiness, as Anna had said? Please unmute yourself.
Yes. So what is important when you want to build with us, as I said before, it is how to manage properly the resources, especially if people move out of the cities now to go to the more rural areas. They will have more space to develop their land, and they have first to be very sensitive and aware of how the land is, what they have to build. That means to control the contour of the land, to see, know the contour, to see from where the sun is coming, from where the winds are coming, what are the main directions of the rain and the wind bringing the rain, and so on. And then they can integrate these climatic parameters into their design. And they have also to see where to take the earth from the site, because in Auroville is a city which is under construction since about more than 50 years now. I will not go too much into details with Auroville, but we live in total nature in Auroville. And whenever we have built something with us, we always take the resources from the site. It means you have minimum transportation of materials and we take the local labor to build whatever we have to do. It means first step is to be sensitive to the nature which surrounds yourself, and then build in this nature by taking these resources with a total sensitivity of it. So that's why when you have built with us in Auroville, we take always the resources from the site and use these quarries to transform them into rainwater harvesting systems, wastewater systems, basement floor, swimming pools, and so on. And this is really something people have to learn, how to use the resource from nature, but to keep an ecological balance that we don't have anymore in the cities.
I love that, the ecological balance. Valeria, I'm going to bring the question over to you, since you said that you live in a beautiful rural countryside area. And so what would be your advice on, as people are maybe moving further out of the cities, how can we still keep the integrity of our land as people start building?
There are two aspects to consider. First of all, I would like to say something about our role as a technician, as experts. I think that we can play an important role in such a situation. And as a technician, a technical expert, I do not know how to define myself. I would say that I do not want to speak of urban happiness in rural areas, because this is I feel this kind of approach to rural areas as a superimposition of an expert view that have already decided how to plan or design a building or a city. So I believe that rural areas include a different kind of happiness, the happiness of silence, the happiness of dark, the dark in the night, the happiness of interact genuinely with other people without having a competitive relationship. And I've lived for a short time in Paris, and I couldn't stay in Paris for a long time, but not myself. Many people are very stressed from the competitive environment, but not only in Paris, obviously, even in my own city, in my small city, people run and run in order to, because they want to achieve something. So as an urban planner, I would listen to people rather than impose a specific paradigm that can orient people in their choice. So I've always practiced participation, but not a kind of participation involving people just to listen and then forget what they want. But I think that co-designing urban-rural areas can be crucial in this way, in this moment, because if we start, I have to stop speaking.
Yeah, I'll come back to you though. I
I
will come back
just a word. If we can co-design, perhaps we can learn together.
Oh, I like that term. Absolutely. And I'm actually going to go over to Erum. Valeria said a couple of things that actually remind me of you, because I know you're all about strong relationships and empowering others in that collaborative community. So I'd love to hear your take on this.
Yeah, I think that's important. I might segue to something I wanted to, that she said that was, touched on something that came to my mind, is when she said to people go to rural areas to enjoy many things, but including the night and the darkness. And so we need to talk about like light pollution, and I think about cities. So that's important, right, for safety perspectives of having light and lighted areas in urban settings. But one of the other wonderful things about the pandemic, I think I've also discovered and become obsessed with, and being fortunate living in a northern area, is the Aurora Borealis. And I'm going to just post something in here, but it's kind of, when you talk about the gifts that the nature brings, that's another piece, but it requires the ability to be in a dark setting so you can see the beautiful lights that come from the solar flares that occur. And it's become quite the, I don't know, subculture or whatever in Alberta. The Aurora, which came over Thanksgiving weekend, we had a huge a solar flare, and you could actually see it in the city in my backyard, which was really rare because usually there's too much light. You generally have to drive out about 15 minutes to half an hour outside of the city and sit on a country road and see and be in complete darkness and see the lights. But anyways, it was possible, and to have that experience is quite awe-inspiring and life-changing. So then when you talk about things about collaboration, and maybe I'll segue back about that piece, I think the conversations that I'm having is that there's no one group that can have the solution. So it takes government, it takes the private sector, it takes the not-for-profits or those that work in social agencies to come together to figure out, first of all, ask different questions. Some of the questions that I've been posed would be, for instance, what would it look like if no one in the area that I live in goes home hungry, that everyone has enough to eat? Or what does it look like if everyone in Edmonton has a roof over their head? What would that look like? And then it's like, how do you get there? What do we need to do to get there? And we might need to look at, I think the pandemic has also exposed a lot of biases that we have, that we've built our communities on, ideas of, what's been fair and what actually has been fair, inequalities, you know, where those who've been left behind, what resources they actually need. And I think one of my panelists talked about, you need to ask people. And I think that's a really important thing, is asking those that are most impacted, what is it that you need, or what is it that's lacking, or how do we get these resources to you in a better way that's more effective. And I think there was a question about, maybe we'll get to it, I'm running out of time, but the concept of what do we learn from indigenous communities? And I think a couple of things that, so I ran out of time, but maybe in another part.
I'm going to ask that question later. Yeah. So, and I love that you brought up about the light pollution. I lived in Hawaii for 16 years. It's home to me, even though I'm in Bangkok now. And they had special light, so that way they could not have as much light pollution. So that way, obviously, the observatories could see what they need to see, and it didn't interfere with stuff. But it was really quite a lesson for me to learn. So thank you for that, Erum. Satprem, I'm going to come to you because being in Auroville, and they're very collaborative, obviously, and just this ecosystem. What are some of the things that they're doing inside Auroville, or you guys are doing inside Auroville, that that could aid others in what we're talking about, the collaborativeness and listening to each other and being able to empower each other when planning is happening, when the architecture is being made?
In fact, in Auroville, it's not so easy to plan anything, because I would say the town planning office in Auroville may be the only town planning office in the world which doesn't have a town planner. So there are people of goodwill, people who try to do something, and there is, to my impression, not enough collaboration in Auroville on that, because there are decisions which are made by these town planning groups, and they don't involve the community. Then there is reaction from the community, and then we go to dead ends. And because it's a problem of how people organize together this participation. And presently there is a problem of one of the major development aspect of Auroville, which is called the Crown Road, which is a service road. In fact, we call it service road, but it's a circulation access which allows Auroville to be disturbed by different zones of the city. And it's just mostly an infrastructure corridor, not really a road. And I would say we're not yet able to teach anybody what to do with urban development in Auroville. We have a lot of experimentation and achievements in terms of architecture, sustainable architecture, green architecture, but in terms of urban development, I would say we are really far the point that we should have reached already now.
Thank you, Satprem. Valeria, I'm going to come back to you because you were cut off just a little bit with your co-creating. And so what would be some advice, especially because you have, you know, trained in schooled architects and people of profession, listening to maybe the local farmers or the individuals who've lived there for a long time. So how do you bridge that gap between the professionals and maybe the locals and have the best outcome?
First of all, I would like to say that I love living in an urban environment. So I'm not, I do not want to underscore urban environment saying that, oh, rural is perfect. Not at all. What I'm saying is that if we speak about sustainable development, we have to consider that we cannot accept to live only in urban environment. We have to maintain the diversity of urban life and the diversity of ways of living the world. So that's my first idea. How to co-create? That's very difficult. I can understand Satprem, sorry, I do not know how to pronounce his name, but and in fact, many countries are going to cancel any kind of laws concerning urban planning. Urban planning is something scaring people, but urban planning can be many different things for many different people. So this is another kind of debate. How to co-create, no, in an environment in which thinking as a community is not so relevant. I believe that we should escape from standard procedure, like we have to involve actors and then going through. I will involve institutional actors, economic actors, professional actors, but because this doesn't work. So we should, I think that to co-create a co-design something, we should think about ourselves as a community of life, a community of practices. So a place in which we do no longer bring our interest, but a place in which we try to change development models which have shown to be not sustainable. Living with professionals is very challenging. I constantly interact with the social movements, institutional actors, and I think that this is our role. How it's exactly this, how to let people to cooperate.
Thank you, Valeria. I appreciate that. I'm going to bring it over to Anna. I'm going to switch the ask just a little bit to, and actually I'm going to go to you next, Erum, is what are some lessons that we can actually learn from the indigenous in sustainable development or sustainable architecture that we could, and how do we use this knowledge?
Okay,
Yeah, that's a great question.
I'm going to go Anna first and then Erum.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Well, that's a good question, really good question. And it is not easy to keep point for an answer of some minutes. But I will say that before anything regarding just sustainability or architecture, it is about diversity. You learn about diversity. And well, at least my experience is in the indigenous communities in Mexico, in the south of Mexico. And really it is breathtaking. And it's, I mean, it's hard for me to find the words to express. And of course, in another language, it's even harder. But everything starts from the diversity, you know. Even though they are Mexicans, even though we are supposed to be kind of the same, we are not the same. And that is something that it's really, as I said, breathtaking. I will say that we can learn the simplicity of life. It is related to that simplicity of life, which Valeria was referring to. And I think that we can also find in Auroville, as the project was said, it is a simplicity of life which is perfect, and that some way in the road we just lost it, and you will find it again in there. I think it is also lessons regarding the awareness of nature. I remember that I tried to spend there a few months in the year. Of course, with the pandemic has been impossible because they did close. They don't allow anyone to go inside of the community. But once of these experiences that I was there, I asked a little girl, I told her, oh, look, that little ant. And I was looking the ant point of the talk, but she was understanding the ant in the universe. So she answered to me, oh yes, the ant. And she related to me the relationship of the ant in the earth, in the community, in the universe. It was amazing, you know. Not even a PhD will teach you that. And I was like, okay, she was, if I'm not wrong, 5 or 6 years. She was a really small girl, but she understands something that I wasn't able, because as Valeria said, I love urban. I was born in urban context, and probably I will die in an urban context, and I love the craziness of cities. but I'm a human being, and all human beings, we need nature, and we need to be aware, like this little girl, she was with the ant and the universe. So that is like, for me, the greatest lessons anyone could learn. Also the value of education, because when we think in education, sometimes we think about, you know, the school, the faculty, the building where you go. And the communities in Mexico, the indigenous communities, they educate what they need to know for the lifestyle they have in the rural. So they don't need to learn, you know, about chemistry with products, but they do understand about the chemistry in the cleaning process of water, and with the relationship with some plants they don't need to taste, because when they have a pain they taste, and they get, you know, like wealth and warfare with the relationship of nature. And well, they also have a role as guardians of the social, of the nature, of their place. And that thing, I really don't know how to translate it, but the otredad. The otredad is a concept that I did learn with them, that I care for myself the same way I care for you. You know, there is a relationship between you and myself. So I couldn't care about me if I wasn't caring about you. And it's amazing.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you, Anna. I'm going to turn it over to you, Erum. I know you've been waiting for this question.
Yeah, I think that was a fascinating answer, Anna, and I probably could have a whole discussion on this topic. And I have to say I'm a student, but I just want to acknowledge that the lands I reside on, Treaty 6 territory here in Canada, were a traditional meeting ground and gathering place for many nations, including the Niwak, the Cree, the Anishinaabe, the Saulteaux, Niitsitapi, the Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, Iska, Nakota, and many First Nations and Métis people. And so they gathered here because, you know, there's a connection with the natural area, the rivers. They obviously gathered to meet, to connect with one another, to trade, to, you know, share stories, to learn from each other. And, you know, obviously they came from different languages and cultures and backgrounds. And so that is the history that we have built our city on. And I think when we can learn from that, is a couple things. One is the importance of gathering and meeting and connecting and sharing ideas, which exactly is why we have urban centers, right? Is the concept of meeting and gathering and sharing from with one another. You know, commerce, business, education, connections, relationships, all of those pieces. And the other piece I think we can learn from Indigenous peoples, or at least here in Canada, that you know, traditionally their main resource was the buffalo or the bison. They use that as their food, as their resource in terms of creating clothing. Skins were used for clothing. They used the skins to make their homes, the teepees, you know, even just to adorn themselves with jewelry. It was a very vital resource, but they understood how to respect it and how to use it well. And they managed that, lived in harmony for many, many years before, I guess, Europeans arrived. And then there was essentially a severe impact, and that resource was depleted and had extreme consequences for the first peoples of this country. But I think we can think about, how do we manage the resources that we have, that we use to build our communities and societies in a holistic sense, and how do we use it to you know, and obviously improve our lives. And then the other concept that I'm learning that is important, I think, in First Nations communities and cultures is the concept of thinking not just of your current situation or generation, but thinking up even to 7 generations ahead. So you're actually kind of borrowing from the future generations. And so how would you, what would your decisions look like if you had different, if you had to think about that, you know, how would it impact your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, your great-great-grandchildren, and what decisions would you then make now? And so I think those are a couple pieces that I think we can learn from the Indigenous peoples.
Thank you, Erum. I'm going to come to you, Satprem. Erum spoke about what resources are out there and how we can best utilize them, obviously with the Indigenous understanding their resources and how to make them last. From your experience with sustainable architecture, what are some of the most underused resources and how can we best use them?
Okay. As I'm a specialist with building with earth, we always take the resource from the site itself. But in Auroville, we have also a lot of wood, because Auroville, that you can imagine, about what, 58 years ago, or in the 1968, Auroville was a barren land. We have planted a few million of trees in Auroville since that time, and now we have forests. And this forest could be used. And this is an approach that people should have for the sustainable development. In principle, if you cut a tree, you should plant 2. And then you are sure that there will be at least 1 or 2 trees in the next 20 years which will be grown. And as I spoke of the ecological balance, you have to see how much you take from nature, but don't take too much and don't take more than you need to have something left for your children. And when you want to build with us, because I have all this as a reference, you have to dig a hole. And you cannot dig endlessly holes everywhere around yourself, because you have to do something from these holes. That's why we plan in advance the rehabilitation plan before, that you convert the quarry into something useful for your development. And until now in Auroville, we had only, I would say, small scale development, who could take the earth from the site itself. But when you speak of suburban development or even urban development, there will not be enough resources on the site to manage to have enough resources to build with. That means you have to plan something alternately somewhere else, where you can have major rainwater harvesting systems or major wastewater systems to be developed. And this is how, when I speak of environmental balance, is to see the average of what to take from nature and what to give back to nature in terms of appropriate development. And in Auroville, we have also a lot of bamboo, but we don't use bamboo here, because first, the bamboo is not really a great quality here, but we have to see what are the local resources available in your place and manage them in such a way that you don't deplete them. And that's why when we do cut some trees here, we plant more, in fact. And when you take the earth from a site, we create something from this hole which can be useful for the development of the place. And at the end, in all the projects that I have done in Auroville, you cannot notice what the soil was taken from, because everything has been integrated in the urban development of the place.
Excellent. Thank you, Satprem. I'm going to change it up a little bit, maybe a little controversial, but I wanted to ask, and Valeria, I'm going to come to you with this question. Do you think it's a question of power or a question of gender, or even cultural when dealing with urban development and town planning, where you might see some inequalities? And I'm going to turn it over to you, Valeria, and then Anna next.
Okay, this is a very complex question, but it's strongly linked to the previous question. What power relations, Doreen Massey thought that space is a spatial relationship and geometries of power. So sure, the life we live is shaped by geometries of power relationship. And the challenge to urban planning is changing those power relationship. How to change? Because change can mean everything. So how to change? To me, values, fundamental values are equity, social justice, environmental justice, inclusion, respect of the other, diversity, and so on. I'm radical in some way, so I can synthesize I do not think to be radical, but surely radical if we compare my position to dominant position promoting financial investment in the cities, for example. But anyway, how to change. I think that we need to be very, very realistic in this, even maintaining an utopic view. So I think that we should try changing step by step. So how to change? First of all, we should protect indigenous knowledge, because it's something that has raised, and it's like a species that we need to protect, because indigenous knowledge is a philosophy of life. It's not just how to do things, but it's a philosophy of life, as Anna underlined. And so gender. I've always been involved with gender issues, and I'm not really keen to use the gender perspective, because I think that how can I say, it's a matter of diversity, of respecting diversity. If we continue to underline that, I can understand that I want to respect everyone. So, and everyone can be free to choose which kind of gender belongs to. But from my point of view, we cannot think of a way of doing planning with the gender concept, which is better than another kind of.
Absolutely. Valeria, thank you. You've ran out of time. Anna, I'm going to come over to you. Do you see any differences, as well as, yeah, the same question?
Yes, well, first I will name some examples in indigenous communities in Latin America, where a woman who does not belong to that particular community cannot enter to that community, but a man can, you know, so that's one. In many other communities, women cannot have an active participation in social life and not even imagine in any trade or work, only domestic tasks. And I'm not speaking about Mexico, in several communities. Urban life is not far of that. A woman continues to receive in a lot of places, it's not a 100% situation, but it is more presented that what I will wish. But a woman can receive a lower salary than a man with the same profile. And it is frowned upon that women decide to work and develop, or even in some places to walk alone. Definitely, I do think that it is not about gender only. As Valeria was saying, it is something cultural. It is something hide on the education. I do not consider myself a feminist. I am more in the track of inclusion perspective. So I have seen cases where also a man can be you know, punished because of being a man. So that's where I don't think I am a pro of life and diversity, not only for women, not only for men, for everyone. So I think that it's a trade-off of culture, and it's hard to say if it's okay or if it's bad. I'm not into it, but we need to re-question a lot of things in cultures, and to say, okay, that was made before. Why was that made? You know, why that the woman could not enter, but a man could enter? And sometimes there are answers that will kind of justify the situation 100 years ago. But nowadays, that's not possible. Things have changed, and we are kind of stuck in the past sometimes, trying to live with the past, but in the present and thinking in the future. And we really, really need to reconnect with the profiles, the environment, the situation where we are in the present, not fighting only for one, for the woman or for the man, fighting for everyone. And this is why I as I said, I think that it's a question of cultural and sometimes gender in the present, but sometimes.
Thank you for that. I'm going to come to you with that question, because you you are, like you said, on a city council and more on the government side. So what's your take on that question?
Yeah, I think it's complex. I do think there's inequalities in terms of how urban development and design occurs. And I'm going to give an example. So the conversation that transpired with my colleagues had me thinking and reminding me of an experience that I had when I visited Columbia Heights on a conference myself. We were touring it and we visited an urban, you can say a square, a gathering space, and talking to community members about how it was developed. So it was used, you know, you saw families there sitting there, and they had like kind of like a semicircle space with some benches, and it's a gathering space. So they have a farmer's market every week, etc. So well used. But when we met with the community members, they were basically sharing how controversial it was. And there's conversations about whether they should have benches because they didn't want homeless people, unhoused people sleeping on them, and that created a safety issue. And, you know, there's a lot of crime in the area or whatever. And so they went back and forth. And then, so the conversation, I'm going to just pause it there because I'm going to share the second part of my experience in the same area. We went by, so my background is transportation. So we were looking at more from a transportation perspective. We went by an LRT station, and there were some men sitting on milk crates just by the entrance of the LRT. And so I went over to them and asked them, why are you sitting on the milk crates? Because there's benches literally like a few feet away from you. Why are you not sitting on the benches? They didn't give me a direct answer, but after a while they sort of said because they weren't welcome to. And so it's funny how we can self-police, how certain individuals can use collective spaces. And I thought that was fascinating because, you know, that whole idea of those that are deemed appropriate and those who are not deemed appropriate, and who's making those decisions and who have the power. So literally there's like benches a few feet away from individuals who are sitting on milk crates underneath this LRT to get some rest or and during the day. Back to the conversation again with the community group and the space that was the square, you know, they went back and forth. And so finally, how did they actually get to see and say, okay, let's build these benches, let's have a full community space with all the amenities? And it was really one individual standing up and saying, why do we always go to the lowest common denominator? Why don't we just elevate it and have a higher expectation of how people would behave in the space? And so sort of like turning that question, and so then everybody could agree. So I think in my experience, it matters who is at the table making decisions. It matters who you are including in the planning and development processes, and having a diversity of opinions and viewpoints at those points when decisions are being made, I think is really important.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, I'm going to come back. Oh, Ana, you have your hand up. I'll come right back to you then.
Thank you, Lynn. Well, I teach here in Mexico, and sometimes architecture school. And it's really amazing at the beginning of the semester with new students when you have the approach for some topics, some of them related to sustainability. And at the beginning you see, I mean, they are young, I understand that, but the background and the cultural issues of saying, okay, I'm an architect, I am a woman, I will go or specialize for interior design. Okay, and what are you going to do? Oh, I'm a man. I'm going to be a builder, and I'm going to work for architecture in that approach. At least I do try to have readings, you know, for them to understand that I don't want them to impose what I think, but I want them to reflect. And if it's on the end of the semester, they still think the same. That's okay. That's a life decision. But I get to realize after a lot of reading, discussion panels with the students and everything, that they have never questioned about that, you know. The girls sometimes they said, but well, you know, I'm gonna work in interior design because that's what my mom told me, because I'm a woman. She does not imagine myself in the middle of a high-rise construction in the center of the city. But you know, I do imagine myself. And the guys, there are a lot of men who have told me, I'm gonna specialize in interior design because first of all, I do discover what it is interior design. And I like it more than building or any other issue. So this is why I go to the key point from my perspective, which is culture and education. You know, it is good sometimes to question what we are and where are we going for, because our parents, they did the best, or any person who made some influence of us. And that is a role we do have to the ones that are younger than ourselves, try to make them reflect and question one time and another about their lives and the way they are going to transcend in the life.
Excellent, Anna. And, you know, as a teacher, I'm sure that having someone supportive like you in their lives, giving them permission to maybe look at other options or to believe different, we need more of that. And I think that we are seeing a lot more of that as well, which is, it's wonderful. Valeria, I'm going to come back to you. You have your hand up.
Yes, I would add something to what I said previously. I have a background as a feminist, so I fought for achieve some new rights for women. So I want to clarify my thought from this point of view. That said, I would like to say that I do not think that using the word gender, the urban planning can change the things. But I strongly, I worked with very disadvantaged women. And what I want to underline now is that we should always ask ourselves the right to the city of who? For whom we are planning? Who's the city? These are two basic questions, and we never, if we realize that we live in a geometry of power relationship, which are in this kind of world surely unequal, then we have always asked ourselves, who are the vulnerable? Who are the fragile people? How have we have we forgot them? Should we involve them? Or should they be absolutely involved in our effort? So it's not only cultural, I would say it's a political approach to life, political in a very wide sense, which also implies a living space to dissensus. We need to let people to express their needs and give them solutions. If I think of women fighting for being involved in the working class, then I can really support this kind of approach to urban planning.
Thank you, Valeria. Satprem, I want to come to you. For those of us that know a little bit about Auroville, we know that it's a very collective and everyone plays a part regardless of man, woman, etc. Do you feel that it makes a difference do you feel gender plays a role in architecture and in the ability to be able to create something, and how do you make that work within the ecosystem that you have in Auroville? Unmute.
Yes, I would say that in Auroville, this does not really apply because Auroville is meant to be a city for about 50,000 people at the maximum. Presently, we are only maybe 2,500, but from 59 countries. And with all kind of background, all kind of problems that we brought with ourselves. I would say the gender equality in Auroville is quite well balanced. You have more or less half of architects which are men and half of women. in terms of the different management groups and the so-called talent planning, it's the same. And for me, it's more a matter of power, at least in the context of Auroville. I cannot say for every cities of the world, but at least in Auroville, it's more a problem of power. Not necessarily, like we said, to have power trips and for people who want absolutely to have the power, but that really don't know how to involve the community and how to have people involved in their decision-making process of how to plan a city in Auroville. In India, it's totally different because in the villages around Auroville, women, they have nothing to say. And in general, a woman in India is paid 2/3 of the price of a man for the same qualification. And this is cultural. And whenever I tried with our team of workers to have women paid the same salaries as men, it's not possible in India. Because the next day, the men, they don't work anymore. So this is a problem, but in terms of, I would say, more evaluated people, like in for the students of architecture, for example, you have more women than men in the School of Architecture. After what they will do of their knowledge and in their practice, I really don't know. But you have more and more women in the field of planning and architecture who are involved in India now. That's why there is a possible change in terms of decision-making process later.
Thank you, Satprem. Yeah, it's incredible seeing the shift even in countries where maybe it's a little bit slower, but still the shift is happening. So I can't believe it. We're almost at an hour and a half. So I want to leave this as this last question, and I'd like to give you each 2 minutes, is what would be, for anybody listening to this, because not everybody is in architecture or in urban development. So what is something that even the common person can go out and do today to make an impact, to be more sustainable, to understand urban development, whatever it is? Like, what are your last little tidbits? And I'm a practical person, so I love practical things that I can do. So, and I'm going to start with you, Erum, if you don't mind going first. 2 minutes of last tips and ideas.
Yeah, I think what I would take it from approach of advocacy. And so I think we were talking about the last topic about power differential and dynamics. I think is wherever you live, if there's something that you're passionate about, a cause, whether it's, as simple as, like, I don't know, in my area, snow removal or traffic safety or whatever, I think you need to get involved, use your voice, and write to those decision makers, people in power, and share your point of view. Never think that you're powerless or it doesn't matter. And I think in this day and age, it's even more important. So I think I leave it with that, is to always understand your power and to engage and take part. We have community leagues in Edmonton. So even if it's as simple as getting involved in your community league, creating that sense of community, or even when you go out for a walk, if it's as simple as appreciating where you live, picking up some garbage as you walk along your daily route, saying hello to your neighbors and finding out who is your neighbor. I think we're somewhat disconnected in this modern world with our devices, but reaching out to others. And I just wanted to leave with a sense of potentially hope, that I know that right now there seems to be tremendous challenges. Pandemic, we're still living under, lots of change, and the future seems uncertain, but I think hope is a powerful force, and I think that we should carry that and share that with others.
Thank you, Erum. I'm going to come to you, Valeria. What's your last thoughts, or even some tips or advice?
My advice is being utopic, not practical. Sorry, because I've seen several practical solutions that have devastated the sustainable development thinking. That said, I want to give some direction. And we know that I would also like to underline that we have to adopt a a thinking which is contextualized. What I said was said from Italy, from a different country, from India. No, that's. I hope that this is clear. But I want to say something that I think will be crucial for the future. Start thinking as nature and culture are not disconnected. Let's try to protect animals. We have not spoken about the way in which we consider animals nowadays. That is a dramatic transformation characterizing our times. We are moving from a natural world to a world where every human and non-human being is controlled. And the life of animals in intensive farmland is something that should be considered in our future activities as something to avoid. We need to start from fundamentals.
Absolutely.
That's my thought.
No, thank you, Valeria. And yes, we ran out of time. There are so many questions that we could have been asked, but I'm going to go to you, Satprem, and then Anna, I'll have you finish this out. Satprem, what are your, what's your last bit of advice or points you'd like to make?
Yes, I would say to be more aware of, in fact, the nature, but only from the social environment, which is, in fact, social and natural environment. That means be aware of where you live, what are the local resources, what are the local human resources. This means know your neighbors, and you have to work together. Because if you build something alone somewhere, you will have maybe a little impact locally. But if you want to go far, you have to go together. And in India, there is this movement called Swaraj, which is a self-governance movement, where people and communities try to work together to achieve something they cannot do alone. So if you can work together, then you can go further. And you can have more power in terms of self-government, decide what you want to do, not what you want to do, see what resources you can avail locally, and then how you can transform these resources for your own needs and do the things locally. Thank you.
Thank you, Satprem. And Anna.
Thank you. Well, first, individually seek for your well-being and your loved ones, of course. There are many strategies, whether you live in the city or the rural areas, but look forward for your well-being. Second, be aware of your responsibility to the planet and to your society. Take care of water and take care of air, for sure. Third, be an active citizen. And finally, question everything in a kind but analytical way. And I think those will be for me.
Oh, thank you so much. And again, all the panelists, Erum, Satprem, Anna, and Valeria, thank you for coming on today and sharing your knowledge. And yes, so many nuggets. This hour and a half just flew by. I really wish we had more time to discuss so many other topics, but hopefully all of you watching, you got something out of this and you can use your voice to make a change in your own community. So thank you again, panelists, and we appreciate you. And yes, take care. Bye, everyone.
Okay. Thank you. Bye. Thank you.